Welcome to That's My Opinion, where we break down the biggest stories, uncover hidden truths, and explore why they matter. I'm Bacon Bears, and today we're covering episode 2 of American Manhunt, the O.J. Simpson documentary just released on Netflix. And I have to tell you, I'm 30 seconds into it, and I already have thoughts. Also, if you've been here for a while and you've noticed, we're making some changes around these parts, so bear with me. If you missed my coverage of part 1, I'll have it linked in the cards and the description box down below. Episode 2 opens with O.J. in a chilling deposition, and he's asked, "Did you remember saying at Nicole's funeral, 'I loved her too much'?" And he immediately cuts in and says, quote, "Not too much, no, that I loved her," unquote, followed by, and I quote, "'cause I didn't do it." It was unprompted and nobody asked. And I can already feel it in my bones that this episode is going to be something. Now, I just want to give you a quick insight into how I cover documentaries, just so you know when I'm covering these, you're getting my thoughts in real time. I put on the documentary, I do speak to text, and then we just go from there. But I immediately recognize the voice of the first man that they introduce, and it's Mike Gilbert, who is OJ's former agent. And the first thing he says is, quote, "OJ has been my idol since I was a kid." And right away, my mind goes to all the people who were complicit in his behavior until something absolutely terrible happened. And then suddenly it's like, oh shit, self-preservation time. And while I'm eager to hear this side of the story, I also can't help but think you were in on it. You knew who he was, you helped him hide assets, and it's the same conversation that we just had about P. Diddy's assistant coming forward in one of our live streams. The problem with some of these interviews, or my issue with some of these interviews, is that yes, you can be the victim of these people's behavior, but also there were times when you were complicit in this behavior, but you just turned a blind eye because it paid well, or because there were gifts, or because there were benefits to not saying anything. And it's just what's running through my mind at the opening of this episode. Ron Shipp, another complicated friendship. And honestly, that's the same thing I think about when I hear from him. He was one of OJ's friends since they were teenagers, and he knew OJ was abusing Nicole because Nicole told him. And let's not forget, Ron Shipp was a police officer, and yet he stayed friends with OJ. Even when Nicole was murdered, his first reaction was not to believe that OJ did it, but deep down, he even says himself that he knew it was him. Honestly, it's hard to sit through some of these interviews knowing that so many people could have stopped this locomotive at any point in time, but they didn't. And that's what makes this case so frustrating to this day. Mike Gilbert starts talking about OJ and how his image was the most important thing to him. Even OJ himself has admitted that in other interviews. He said that coming from poverty, it wasn't just about the money, it was about the fame. It was how people recognized him, how they saw him. And when he walked into a room, he wanted people to be like, oh, there's OJ. And by all accounts, he achieved all of that. He was famous across the board and in both Black and white communities. And in Mike's interview, he explains that as OJ's agent, it was his job to make sure that his client was a hero or perceived that way. And OJ knew how to play that part perfectly. He was super charismatic on screen. And as they flip back and forth between Mike's interview and OJ's deposition about the Bronco, the blood, and Nicole's blood being at his house, Mike says something really interesting. He asks the question, is OJ a good person, or did OJ do a bad thing? Or was OJ a bad person who sometimes did good things? And his answer was, even after years of knowing him and being his friend, he still had no idea. He didn't really know who he was dealing with. And honestly, I feel like this could be the case in a lot of true crime stories. When someone is charismatic and likable, there's a natural tendency to not want to believe that they're capable of horrific things. But if someone is socially awkward, narcissistic, or aggressive, they're immediately painted as the villain. And I do think that OJ was genuinely charismatic in that way. But I also think that the real reason he was able to transcend racial barriers was because he knew exactly which room he was in at the time. He was a chameleon. And it makes you wonder, if you're constantly playing a part like OJ was all the time, do you even know who you are anymore? Who's OJ then when nobody's there? So they set the scene for June 17th of 1994, 5 days after the murders. And the last episode ended with the LAPD obtaining an arrest warrant for OJ. But what they didn't mention was that Robert Shapiro had personally called the police, assuring them that OJ would turn himself in. No problem. Don't worry about it. We'll have him there. Well, morning came and went. OJ never shows up. Which, how does something like this happen? I mean, we find out how it happens, but you're just like, how was this able to happen? The documentary briefly cuts to Kim Goldman, Ron Goldman's sister, and she shares questions, which are the same questions I have. Still, why, with so much evidence against OJ, was he given the luxury of simply walking into the station and turning himself in, rather than being arrested on the spot? And why? Putting myself into her shoes, I cannot imagine the anger of knowing that someone with this much evidence against them was being treated with these like kid gloves after murdering one of my loved ones. And by now, media had swarmed Parker Center, LAPD headquarters, assuming that OJ would surrender. Reporters, cameras, helicopters, everyone was there for the shot. But then across town, at Nicole's house, it was absolute chaos. Helicopters hovered, reporters swarmed. And the question on everybody's mind was, is OJ there? And Mike Gilbert tells us that he thought that OJ had gone to Rob Kardashian's house. Yes, that Rob Kardashian. They were all friends. Detective Tom Lang, who we meet in the last episode, calls Robert Shapiro and he's like, where is he? And Shapiro, who is at Rob Kardashian's house, also downplays the situation. He's like, oh, you know how he is when he's upset. This man is wanted for a double homicide. So at that point, Lang dispatches 2 police cars to go pick up OJ. But what they didn't know was that OJ's already gone. He's left. And at this point, David Gaskin, the LAPD spokesperson, steps up for a press conference, which was already 2 hours late. And he announces, OJ didn't show up. We are actively looking for OJ Simpson. And if you watch this back, if I can find a clip of it, there is audible gasps in the room. Everybody's like, oh.
The Los Angeles Police Department right now is actively searching for Mr. Simpson. The Los Angeles Police Department is also very unhappy with the activities surrounding his failure to surrender.
And you can see it on Gaskin's face. This is a disaster. OJ had just humiliated the LAPD. They had given him the brunch hour courtesy of 11 a.m. to turn himself in. And he said, no thanks. And Gaskin, now frustrated, let the media have it. He's like, OJ Simpson is a murder suspect. 2 counts of murder. This man is a fugitive. And then someone in the press room asks the obvious question, didn't you have a tail on him this whole time? And Gaskin, already flustered, responded, yeah, we're not going to comment on that. You don't have to, because the answer is no. So basically, the LAPD just crossed their fingers and they hoped that OJ would show up. And he pinky swore, guys, no takesies, backsies. And then a reporter asks, how did you lose him? And honestly, I just wanted David Gaskin to respond, well, he's a fast man. Best running back of all time. Not funny. This is not funny. I mean, this situation is quite comical because under what other circumstances would this be allowed to happen? And then another reporter asks, was OJ given preferential treatment? And Gaskin flat out denies it. He's like, no, there's no preferential treatment. Really? Show me any other black man in 1994 Los Angeles with this much evidence against him in a double homicide who would have been given the opportunity to just walk into the police station on his own terms. I'll wait. So the whole world stops at this point. The media wasn't just in a frenzy. It was worldwide chaos. Then DA Gil Garcetti steps up for a press conference. He looks exhausted and he says, it's 3 p.m. No juice. And again, I know how the story ends. I know the ins and outs, but phenomenal storytelling by Netflix because they really capture the tension at this moment. And then authorities call out a man named Al Cowlings. And this is OJ's best friend. And they call him out on national television. And they're like, listen, if you're helping him, that's a felony. And then the documentary cuts back to Mike Gilbert, OJ's agent, who was at a hotel frantically calling him. And they're like, OJ, if you need anything at all, just call me back. And he does get a call back, except it's from somebody he doesn't know. And they were like,
yeah, what do you mean anything?
And he's like, who the fuck is this? And they were like, oh, it's the LAPD. We're just tapping the phone calls. And he's like, oh, click. He just hung up on him. It's just chaos. This whole moment is chaos. Then we see Robert Shapiro alongside Robert Kardashian giving a press conference, and Shapiro looks absolutely defeated, saying, I told him we had to surrender by 11. When I showed up, he's not there. Then Robert Kardashian steps forward and starts reading a letter from OJ. And at this point, the documentary flashes back to old footage of OJ and Nicole. And it's showing moments from their relationship, their marriage, their life, their kids. And honestly, it's heartbreaking because at some point they were in love. And then it became this abusive, toxic cycle. According to one of Nicole Simpson's friends, the relationship was toxic from the start. Allegedly, OJ was forceful on their first date, but sometimes, we get ourselves into situations and red flags get overlooked. And sometimes they turn into nothing. And sometimes, unfortunately, they turn into everything. Abusive relationships are like that, though. You can't see the forest through the trees. You get so deep into it that it feels like there's no way out. You start believing that you're not worthy of love. You're not worthy of happiness. You're not allowed to leave. You're married. You made a commitment. You have kids. You can't break up this family. And the list of these justifications never ends. And yes, he was abusive, but then he apologized. And then he said he loved me. And that's the most dangerous part of abusive relationships. The highs feel so good because the lows are so devastatingly low. And breaking out of that mindset, it's one of the hardest things to do. It takes so long to relearn and reshape your brain to understand that you are a worthy human. You are worthy of love, respect, kindness, support, care. There are a billion other people out there who will love you and respect you the way that you deserve. And watching this family footage together, seeing their marriage, I couldn't help but think of my own wedding. And I remember watching our wedding video and looking back at who I was at the time. And I was making this forever commitment with my best friend, with the love of my life. And I'm sure that at one time, that's what she felt too. And it's just so heartbreaking to watch this back in real time. And as Robert Kardashian reads OJ's letter, the documentary cuts to interviews with people who knew him, people who say all the same things, right? Like OJ didn't like to lose. And in this letter, OJ writes, I loved her so much. And we decided it would be good to separate for now. Like he was going to get her back. But more than that, I think OJ couldn't stand the idea of her being with someone else. OJ was a winner. Always. There were a few things in this letter that really stuck out to me, so I want to break them down with you. He writes, first, I want everyone to understand I had nothing to do with Nicole's murder. I loved her, always have, and always will. If we had a problem, it's because I loved her so much, which is the first thing that causes my antennas to go up, because over loving a person has never caused an issue. Me trying to be controlling has caused an issue. Me being jealous has caused issues. Me being selfish has caused issues, but never loving someone so much. He then goes on, recently we came to an understanding that for now, we weren't right for each other, at least for now. And this immediately tells me that even though Nicole was moving on with her life, OJ really had no intent on doing so or allowing her to do so. He says, despite our love, we were different, and that's why we mutually agreed to go our separate ways. It was tough splitting for a second time, but we both knew that it was for the best. I had no doubt that in my future we would be close as friends or more. And the or more to me, it doesn't sound like he took the split seriously. He just keeps reiterating that at some point they're going to get back together, or he believes that's what's going to happen. The letter states, unlike what's been in the press, Nicole and I had a great relationship for most of our lives together. Like all long-term relationships, we had a few downs and ups. I took the heat for New Year's 1989 because that's what I was supposed to do. I did not plead no contest for any other reason but to protect our privacy, and was advised it would end the press hype. And it's interesting in this paragraph, which he states he took the heat for, which automatically places the blame on Nicole when we have photos, And we have 911 calls, including one of him actively assaulting her while she's on the phone. And then he goes on to say, I think of my life and I feel I've done most of the right things. So why do I end up like this? I can't go on. No matter what the outcome, people will look and point, and I can't take that. I can't subject my children to that. This way they can move on and go on with their lives. I've treated people the way I wanted to be treated. I've always tried to be up and helpful, so why is this happening? I'm sorry for the Goldman family. I know how much it hurts. Nicole and I had a good life together. All this press talk about a rocky relationship was no more than what every long-term relationship experiences, which I have to disagree. Not all long-term relationships experience brutal attacks. OJ says all of her friends will confirm that I've been totally loving and understanding of what she's been going through. At times I've felt like the battered husband or boyfriend because I loved her, made that clear to everyone, and would take whatever to make us work. And this is untrue because Kris Jenner to this day has made it very clear that she hates OJ Simpson, allegedly all for entertainment purposes, because I'm deathly afraid of the Kardashians. But not all of her friends will confirm that. As a matter of fact, when the Brown family got the phone call that Nicole was murdered, her sister was running around screaming, he finally did it. They knew immediately that it was OJ. But again, placing the blame on Nicole. I've felt like a battered husband or boyfriend because I loved her. He's not the one that has had bruises on his face. He's not the one that has been bloodied. He's not the one that dispatch had to release police because he was the one actively getting beaten on the phone. But he goes on, don't feel sorry for me. I've had a great life. I've made great friends. Please think of the real OJ and not this lost person, which is such an interesting thing to say. This would be the moment that if you really had nothing to do with this crime is where you would reiterate that. Please remember who I am. I would never do something like this. But instead, he says, not this lost person. A lot of people took this as a suicide note, but personally, I didn't see it that way. I also found it very interesting that inside of the O and OJ, he put a smiley face, which I really try to have a better understanding of these cases and these people, and I just don't. I don't. We get introduced to Carl E. Douglas, which is one of OJ's defense attorneys, and I have many mixed feelings about this man. From other interviews I've seen with him, I love his vibe, I love his attitude, his whole presence. I get it, I understand it. But at the same time, he embodies everything that I hate about defense attorneys. I'm sorry if you're a defense attorney. I know you have a job to do, but he openly admits in other interviews that they did things to stage winning a case for OJ that even he knew weren't ethically right. So, it doesn't feel great. But if I needed a defense attorney, I hope they would also go to the nth degree to make sure that I didn't go to prison. I don't know. It's a hard one, especially in this case, because I think most of us can agree, not all of us, but most of us can agree that OJ committed this crime, allegedly. But in the opening of Carl's interview, he basically says that while he didn't believe the OJ letter was an admission of guilt, he absolutely thought that OJ had spent his entire life being the most popular guy in the room, and now he is a murder suspect, and he had no idea how to handle it. And then at 4:45 p.m. that same day, the LAPD finally gets the call. Someone has spotted OJ on the freeway. And this is where it just kicks off. Helicopters, a police chase, every single TV station tuning in live. It was such a massive event that they literally cut into the NBA Finals, doing a picture-in-picture of the broadcast on one side of the screen. Game 5 of the finals. And on the other, OJ Simpson in the white Bronco leading a police chase. And they just put the NBA finals over to the side. And then as the finals are happening, they put the Bronco chase up on the Jumbotron at Madison Square Garden. That's how massive this was. These players are in the most important game of their lives. And yet they're standing on the court watching OJ on the freeway. And what we see next is maybe one of the most surreal moments in history. OJ with Al Cowlings is driving down the freeway, followed by police in what almost looks like a police escort. They're giving him time, they're giving him grace, they're letting him control the situation. But just to put this into perspective, Rodney King, who was not wanted for murder, was beaten to within an inch of his life by the LAPD. And the contrast between how they handled him and how they handled OJ could not be more obvious. Sorry, David Gaskin, but the preferential treatment OJ got from this start to finish is unbelievable. But then Al Cowlings calls the police, sounding panicked. He's like, you got to tell the police to back off. I have OJ in the car. He's alive, but he has a gun to his head. And then Kim Goldman recalls watching the chase unfold and people are yelling like they should blow his tire out or they should ram the car. And she's like, no, we need him in court so that way we can get the truth. And obviously we know how this turns out, but what I wouldn't give to have a sit down with Kim Goldman. Just imagining what a complete mindfuck this must have been for her family is unreal. And as the chase continues, Al drives back to OJ's house with 14 squad cars following him. People are stopping their cars on the side of the road. Crowds are gathering just to watch it happen. People made signs. Like, how did they get the time to make signs and then go down and hold them up on the freeway? But the entire world is frozen to watch OJ Simpson. They start touching on why this case is so much bigger than OJ Simpson's celebrity. OJ, who had spent years distancing himself from the Black community, now found himself as a symbol of hope, a beacon, really. And he became this rallying point after years of oppression, discrimination, and brutality at the hands of law enforcement. Even if some believed that OJ was guilty, many in the Black community just wanted a win. America had watched 4 white police officers beat a man named Rodney King while other officers stood back and did nothing. And what were the consequences? None. There were none. The officers were acquitted, walking free, despite the entire nation seeing what they had done. And Rodney King, he became one example, just one, in a decades-long pattern of how the Black community was mistreated, disregarded, and brutalized by law enforcement. Honestly, even if you don't care about OJ Simpson, I would highly recommend watching these documentaries just to get a better understanding of the mindset, the pain, and the turmoil of this time. It puts a lot into perspective. Because when America watched those 4 officers receive their not guilty verdict, it sent a clear and devastating message to the Black community. They're not worth protecting. They're not worth being treated equally. They were not valued the same as their white counterparts. And at that point, they had had enough, which rightfully so. And this is essentially what set off the LA riots. There's an infamous scene from the riots that is incredibly difficult to watch. A white truck driver being pulled from his vehicle and beaten relentlessly. And where are the police? They never come. The LAPD pushed this community to its breaking point. And then when everything explodes, they just let it burn. They claimed it was too dangerous to intervene, even though they were the ones who fostered this environment in the first place. They took an oath to serve and protect. Yet when the community that they failed time and time again finally erupts into anger and exhaustion, they're nowhere to be found. And so when OJ Simpson was put on trial, whether or not he was guilty, whether or not he had separated himself from the Black community, they did not want to see another Black man suffer injustice. Detective Tom Lang manages to get OJ on his cell phone, and Lang starts pleading with him, telling him to think about his kids. OJ starts apologizing, saying he can't take this anymore. It's becoming a negotiation. He's trying to keep OJ alive, trying to de-escalate this whole situation. Peter Weirder, a SWAT team leader, recalls how his team was called in because their job was to preserve life, no matter what the situation is. They knew OJ was heading back to his house, and their goal was to get there before anything tragic happened. By this point, people are swarming the house. The scene is becoming more volatile by the second. And when OJ finally reaches Rockingham, the SWAT team was ready. They planned to shut the gates behind him and get him out of the vehicle safely. But then over the LAPD radio, you can hear officers giving different orders And they said, use your discretion. If you have to take him out, do so. At this point, they still believe OJ is armed. And if he steps out of the vehicle with a gun, the police are prepared to shoot him. And then suddenly, somebody random runs up to the car. There's an altercation between this person and Al Cowlings, who was still driving the Bronco. It's also Al's Bronco. Just in case you were wondering where the white Bronco came from, Al Cowlings also had one. But it becomes clear that this person is OJ's son. And it's just pure chaos. People are everywhere. The SWAT team isn't communicating with the LAPD officers, and different teams are trying to achieve different things. And it's just insanity. You can hear Al Cowlings on the phone. He's pleading with OJ, and then he gets out of the car and he's trying to plead with the police not to do anything to OJ, essentially playing this mediator. And Mike Gilbert, OJ's agent, is at the gate, desperate to get inside, saying, I can get him out. And then finally, darkness sets in at about 8:46 p.m. OJ gets out of the car. They get him. He walks up to the house and they arrest him. They put him in the car and they're getting him to go downtown. And this is not the first time that this particular detail has been mentioned in a documentary. It's come up multiple times. But as OJ was being driven away from his home to the police station, screaming for him, cheering for him, and he says, quote, "What are all these slurs doing in Brentwood?" After his arrest, investigators search the Bronco, which belongs to Al Cowlings, and inside they find $8,000 in cash, a firearm, a passport, a cell phone, a disguise kit. And aside from the gun and a bag of Viagra, he basically had the Scott Peterson special. They show a note on screen stating that none of this was presented at trial. Why? I would love to sit down with Marcia Clark or Christopher Darden and just ask them, why? What was the thought process behind that decision? One day I'm going to have interviews on this channel. You just watch. But they show us that OJ's now in court with Robert Shapiro, and Robert Shapiro decides that he wants to exercise OJ's right to a speedy trial. And let's just have a quick lesson on the right to a speedy trial in America. The right to a speedy trial is guaranteed by the Sixth Amendment. It ensures that if you're charged with a crime, the government can't delay your trial indefinitely, forcing you to sit in jail for years waiting for your case to be heard. Each state has its own rules about how long the government has to bring the case to trial. If they miss that deadline and the defendant hasn't waived their right, the charges could be dismissed entirely. So why would somebody waive their right to a speedy trial? Well, it gives them more time to prepare. They can gather evidence and find witnesses. They can negotiate a plea deal. And on the other hand, why would someone push for a speedy trial? Well, it's less time sitting in jail. The government can't hold charges over their head without a trial. It reduces stress and legal costs. But for the defense, it forces the prosecution to act fast, which could cause them to fumble the case, forget evidence, or even drop the charges. And this case, everything moved incredibly fast. On the other hand, credit to Mark Furman, Tom Lang, and everyone who called in Marcia Clark immediately, because she was immediately working on her case. It doesn't work out for her in the long run, but I respect the effort. One of the major factors in this case was the role of Robert Shapiro. Shapiro wasn't a criminal defense attorney. He was more of a celebrity fixer. He could handle PR, media spins, and backdoor deals. But when it came to the theatrics inside of a courtroom, that wasn't his specialty. So they brought in someone who could command the room, someone who knew what it took to truly be a defense lawyer. And that's when they got Johnny Cochran. And Johnny, who on top of being a brilliant trial lawyer, was also a huge advocate inside of the Black community. Johnny Cochran wasn't just a defense attorney. He was a civil rights attorney who made it his life's mission to go after police misconduct and protect his community. They start talking about the assembly of what might be, I don't know, the greatest defense team of all time, what became known as the Dream Team. It included Johnny Cochran, Robert Shapiro, F. Lee Bailey, Alan Dershowitz, Robert Kardashian, Gerald Uelliman, Carl E. Douglas, Sean Chapman-Hawley, Barry Scheck, and Peter Newfield. And the estimated cost of this legal powerhouse, anywhere between $3 to $10 million. And OJ had the money to spend. The way they end this episode, oh my God, phenomenal. I would love to sit in a room with Carl E. Douglas. Oh my God. Just what a storyteller. What a showman. He absolutely had me on the edge of my seat. But at the end of the episode, he said OJ's trial was unique, like a bowl of spaghetti, and all of the mounting evidence against OJ is just like a big, monstrous bowl of spaghetti. And as you're eating it, you find a roach. What do? Do you continue eating, or do you throw out the whole bowl? Because now the food is tainted. And then they flash to a picture of Mark Furman. I have read about this case. I have watched documentaries. I have done my research. But when I tell you that this documentary still had me on the edge of my seat with new details, new perspectives, and new things to consider, I mean it. Again, episode 2, phenomenal. I urge you to watch it, come back and discuss with me, but 10 out of 10. If you liked what you saw here today, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll be covering episode 3 in the next video, but until then, you can watch one of these videos, and I will see you guys next week. I'm Bacon Bears, and that's my opinion.